Welcome back, this is Goku-san DBZ, and this is a special new countdown list. This time specifically, I'm looking at my top 20, not top 10, top 20 favorite Capcom fighting games of all time. So with that said, first a few honorable mentions. Now I'm sure when it comes down to it, that there's definitely going to be a mixed opinion on some of my opinions. Keep in mind, this is my own personal opinions, but these are my top 20 favorite Capcom fighting games of all time. First up, admittedly, some of these are going to be guilty pleasure games I know most people don't like, but with that said, honorable mentions first thing. First honorable mention is none other than Street Fighter the movie, the game, which I know is not a great game, but like I said, guilty pleasure of mine personally. And I will always, for some reason, enjoy this game. Why, I'm not sure, but I always will. Also, honorable mention, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo for the Panasonic 3DO. Arguably the best version, I think, music remixes of the Street Fighter 2 game. Also, a somewhat underrated classic in my opinion, Hidden Gem. Except with hardcore Capcom and Street Fighter fans, of course, that being Street Fighter EX2 Plus for the original PlayStation. A game that I highly recommend to anyone, though it is getting pricey nowadays. So I would say be patient if you're at all interested, or do yourself a favor, get the PS2 game EX3. Far cheaper, and it's in many ways I think better. But still, honorable mention. The next one I know has a lot of haters, but that's fine, I don't care. People can hate all they want, including Max, but regardless, I still love this game, known as Fighting Jam over in Japan, and in Europe here, known as Capcom Fighting Evolution. Now, if you want to watch a long, more in-depth video about this, I recommend checking out the video What Happened from Matt McMuscles. If you're all curious more, or in the future sometime I may actually do a more thorough, like a retrospective video on this game, because this is a game I think is overhated in my personal opinion. Second to last honorable mention, my personal favorite thing from the Street Fighter 3 series, most people always go third strike, for me, it's Street Fighter 3 Double Impact, which has Second Impact and New Generation. And New Generation is my personal favorite Street Fighter 3 game, but everyone has their own opinion on everything. Like the saying goes, everyone has a nose, just like opinion. Last honorable mention is Ultra Street Fighter 4. Though this is arguably the definitive version of the game, this is not the version that I hold high and dear to my heart. And that's the thing, I'm only allowing one version of a specific game on the actual top 20. So don't expect to see multiple versions anyways. With that said, let's get on with the top 20 list. And yeah, wearing my Yu Yu Hakusho shirt. But with that said, here is the list. So, first up, coming at number 20 for me. Number 20 favorite fighting game of all time from Capcom goes to none other than X-Men Children of the Atom, which arguably, in my opinion, is a superb game. This really would be the game that would pave the way for pretty much my favorite, really 2D slash 2.5D fighting game series of all time, that being Marvel vs. Capcom. But for me, yeah, number 20 definitely goes to X-Men Children of the Atom. Love this game, always will love it. Though arguably is the weakest by far in the series, but still comes at 20 because of retro, or rather, I guess you could say nostalgia factor on many things, and the fact this was the introduction to the series as a whole. And still, I actually looks pretty good to this day, I think. Just looking, it's aged very well. Next, coming at number 19, which is a game you can get, by the way, in the Capcom Coliseum. collection already out on multi-platform. If you have a chance, or at least get one of the volumes with selected titles, this is available. I forget which volume it was, if it's volume 1, 2, or 3, but recommend checking it out. Look up the volumes and look at the list. For me, coming at number 19 favorite fine game of all time from Capcom, Cyberbots Full Metal Madness, which is also coming out in the upcoming in June. Of course, the Capcom Fighting Collection, which has some superb games. But with that said, I think this is easily one of the biggest hidden gem 2D fighting games, arguably of the 5th console generation, as well as one of, I think, the tighter 2D fighters on the Sega Saturn. Definitely, this is one of the gems from the Saturn that I think more people need to know and try. And really, if you get a chance, just try out Cyberbots and the fact this is the origin for Jin and Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and 2. There's a lot of interesting factors, and the gameplay of this game is very unique and different. Very much unusual and different for the time when it came out. Still a lot of fun to this day, though, I will give it that. Also, great soundtrack. Coming in at number 18. Really the next, leaving the way to, of course, the crossover series. This would be the technical successor of X-Men Children of the Atom, that being, of course, Marvel Superheroes. And the main villain, of course, of this game being, obviously, a little someone named Thanos. And the sub-boss would be Dr. Von Doom, which arguably, when it comes to Marvel villains of all time, Doom is like in my top 3. At least number 2 favorite Marvel villain of all time, if not possibly number 1. But for me, love this game, and the fact this would be the introduction to, of course, characters like the Incredible Hulk. You would also get Spider-Man added to the roster. You would have Iron Man. You would have Captain America, of course, most important. And obviously, also, you would have a Infinity Stone system implemented, not nearly as good as what Infinite would do many years later, but still, great game, comes in at number 18. And I think it really helped refine a lot of elements from X-Men. Coming in next at number 17. Yes, I'm sure a lot of people would definitely not have this in their top 20 Capcom fighters of all time, but for me it is, as everyone knows by now. The Alpha series is arguably my personal favorite Street Fighter series of all time, always will be, and I even hold Alpha 1 in pretty high regard on the PS1. Yes, it's better on the Saturn, but PS1 is the version I knew and played growing up, because I would constantly go to one of 2 video rental stores and rent this game a lot. Either my local at the time video rental store called Network Video, or of course the all-time classic, Blockbuster. That's where I would be first introduced to Street Fighter Alpha 1, as well as later on to Alpha 2. That is how I first played the Alpha games, was mostly thanks to Blockbuster. But I will always have a special place for places like Blockbuster and nostalgia, and I will always have a special place for Alpha. And this was really a great start, I think, with, of course, secret hidden characters you could play with, like Dan Hibiki, and, of course, most importantly, Akuma, my all-time favorite Street Fighter character. But next up, coming at number 16, I'm sure a lot of people have this probably in their top 10, but for me it comes in number 16, and that is, of course, the classic, the first of the official crossover games in the series for Capcom, and of course that is X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Arguably a very heavy game, though, back in the day. The same with Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. I would originally play these games first on the PS1. Also branded from Blockbuster Network Video. But with that said, great game, interesting find, of course, the somewhat annoying Apocalypse. It was weird how at the end, after you beat Apocalypse, would face whoever your partner was, though of course you could only do one-on-one in the actual PS1 game because of limitations, where with Saturn you could use the 4 megabyte cartridge, expand, and allow it to play perfectly arcade perfect. Still a great game, still a game I highly regard to this day. I think people need to play this if you get a chance. Coming in at number 15 is a game that I think really needs no introduction by now. Coming at number 15 for me personally is Rival Schools. I'm sure some of you out there probably have never actually played Rival Schools, or may you only know through the character specifically that was brought in, of course, as the final DLC, or second to final DLC character for Street Fighter V, of course. And with that said, arguably still, and funny enough, he, of course, a certain individual on the front cover here would also later on be in a game named Tetsunoku vs. Capcom. I like the game, but it's not one of my personal all-time favorites because I've only played it off and on here and there. But for me, yeah, 15 is Rival Schools. Great game, fun mechanics, probably one of the best, I would say arguably maybe the best early 2.5D fighter. Just personal opinion, but I love also the uniqueness about the game. How you actually had like a full story mode and very unique, interesting supers with the different teams you could play as in the game, and the fact it was a 2 disc. Today, this has very much become a very big collector's item for many people, and it's because it's not the easiest to come by. Now, if you're lucky, back several years ago, again, before the price went ridiculous, congrats. If not, hopefully they'll bring in that special future, like new premium, like a PS Plus that's coming in June. We'll see, but yeah, 15 for me, Rival Schools. Next, coming at number 14, is arguably the definitive version of Street Fighter Alpha 3, which is Street Fighter Alpha 3 Max. Weirdly enough, of course, exclusively to the PSP. Now, of course, Alpha 3 Max would also end up, strangely enough, will also have a special character in it, which was a sub-boss in Capcom Fighting Evolution, that being, of course, Ingrid. Strangely enough. But still, I actually didn't mind Ingrid in the game, and I think more people need to give Alpha 3 Max a chance. If you have a shot at trying the game, get it. It's still relatively affordable and cheap. So I recommend it. It's the definitive way to play Alpha 3, though Alpha 3 is still not my favorite Alpha game, of course. Still comes at number 14. Next, coming in 13, I'm sure is going to be somewhat of a hot take. Not sure. Coming in at number 13 for me personally is, of course, Street Fighter EX3. Arguably the most underrated of the trilogy of EX games. Which, of course, we would see many characters come back years later, thanks to Arika with, of course, EX Fighting Layer, which I highly recommend checking out if you get a shot, whether on PS4 or Nintendo Switch. Check it out. Great game, and specifically, I like the crossover mechanics and tag team mechanics in this game specifically, and I think people have finally, after years, really come to appreciate the mechanics and everything in this game. That makes it very distinctive and unique, and superior, in my opinion, to the other 2 games in the series. I know most people speak more nostalgia for the PS1 era games, but for me, I still hold this game specifically in the highest regard. Personal preference, and that's how it is. Speaking of, coming at number 12, I'm not sure what people's opinions are going to be on this, but for me, at number 12, is the first of the official named series. For me, 12th favorite fighting game of all time from Capcom is, of course, Marvel vs. Capcom 1. Now, I am glad at least I got to play this, and only have played this on the Dreamcast, which is a good thing, because the PS1 version, far inferior, can't even come close to the abilities of course, the Dreamcast. Now, with that said, I was lucky to get to try this within, like, the first, 3 or 4 months after launch of the Dreamcast. I would pick this up. Little did I know I would go through and try this game many years later, and it would blow me away, and I would never know what I would experience with the amazing combo system, and of course being introduced for the first time to still arguably, in my opinion, the hardest boss in the franchise, and of course that is Onslaught. But he is still memorable for his design and everything, which would get me to end up checking out the comic years later. Coming in at number 11. I'm not sure what other people's opinions are, but for me, coming at number 11, most people know it better in the West as Night Warriors. I know it better as Vampire Hunter. Comes in at number 11, or in other people's opinions, referred to as Darkstalkers 2. But whatever the case, though I love Darkstalkers 1 is probably the most iconic, it's also by far the inferior game in the series. Vampire Hunter was superb and great in the fact it would also introduce, of course, a pretty awesome character with Donovan, which was definitely one of the more interesting characters, I think, specifically in the Darkstalkers series. Night Warriors, aka Vampire Hunter, which I prefer the vampire name in all honesty. But yeah, for me, 11 is the second game in the series, which is what turned me into a pretty big fan of actually the Darkstalkers franchise as a whole throughout the years. Coming in at number 10. Boy, I'm not sure how people are going to feel about this, but for me personally, a number 10 favorite Capcom fighting game is Street Fighter Cross Tekken. Yeah, I love this game quite a bit. Needless to say, since it came in at number 10, I will always defend this game, and arguably my personal favorite version of the game is the Vita version. I just think it's more fun, plus the fact from the start you have all the DLC characters and everything immediately unlocked is a perk. But it's also a lot of fun to play on the go. I would say outside of this, probably actually though funny enough, the version I would play most on regular console would strangely enough be the 360. Why, I'm not sure, but it just would be. But still, this is the version I've played the most by far. Next, coming at number 9. This is the Japanese, so I also have the American version of the game. And of course, that is also, in my opinion, one of the greatest fighting game cover art of all time. And that is, coming at number 9 for me personally, Project Justice. Or, some would know better as, of course, the sequel to Rival Schools. Though Project Justice would be far superior in many ways, and have even more crazy and ridiculous super combos and stuff, like the fact you could like float, like swim in the air, and do like basically like water ballet and stuff. Supers, it's just bonkers over the wall. If you don't believe me, check out Maximilian's Hype and Rage video of Project Justice. You will be just shaking your head, acting like you have no idea what's going on. Unless you're a longtime Capcom fan, like me and many others out there, you're not gonna know how insane this game can actually get. But for me personally, number 9 goes to Project Justice, very deservingly so. Next, coming at number 8. In my opinion, is a somewhat criminally underrated game. People always talk about X-Men vs. Street Fighter, but this is the game that I love far more. Admittedly, it's partially because it has characters in the game that I like more, and also I think the soundtrack is far better in this game. Plus, I like the fact that Apocalypse is just the secondary boss in this game, and instead you get arguably the best design of Akuma in history, and that is the badass that is Cyber Akuma. I will always defend this game. It's great, and the fact you have amazing characters like Omega Red, which is ridiculously overpowered in this game, may I add. Plus a lot of the other hidden characters, plus in the Japanese version on Saturn, you could play with a Japanese comedian. I kid you not, but exclusively only to this version and platform of the game. It's the only way to play with that character. But with that said, comes in number 8. Coming in at number 7 is arguably my personal favorite version of Street Fighter 4. Coming number 7 for me personally is, of course, Street Fighter, or rather known as Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition. As I've stated multiple times in the past, this is my personal favorite version of the game. Like I've said before, of course, you can get this game dirt cheap. It's more than worth what you can get it for. It's a ridiculously good deal. And the fact you can play these games backwards compatible now with current like gen Xbox if you have the 360 version, then I recommend getting it. Plus also some of I think the best cover art Capcom has ever done in my opinion. Also the fact you have Evil Ryu and of course Oni, though Oni is not my favorite version of Akuma, that is Cyber, though I love Evil Ryu more than regular Ryu. But with that said, number 7. Coming in at number 6. Whoo, I'm sure many people would have this their number 1, but for me, it's number 6. One of the reasons because I hate the main boss. Coming at number 6, Marvel vs. Capcom 2. And of course, a new age of heroes, or however you want to say. But yeah, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, arguably very beloved, deservedly so for what it did. The amount of different combos, the awesome, like, jazzy soundtrack to the game, very unique. Love the soundtrack, love the music and everything about the game. It's a lot of fun. I do think it's a bit overhyped personally, though it's still my number 6 favorite Capcom fighter of all time. So with that said, but yeah, Abyss is arguably the worst boss in the crossover franchise as a whole, in my opinion. At least Capcom Fighting Evolution had Pyron, at the very least, and Secret Boss Shin Akuma. This didn't. It only had 3 forms of Abyss, which, though Form 1 of Abyss actually was kind of cool looking, just not a fan. Though it does have my guy, of course, Doom, most important. But with that said, now coming at number 5, arguably the most controversial and probably hot take out of this entire list. My number 5 favorite Capcom fighting game of all time is a game I've done almost 200 videos on here on my YouTube channel, and I will continue defending to my dying breath. For me, coming in at number 5 is Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Of course, I have played this game on X1 as well as PS4. I love this game. I think overall, though, design-wise, though, I think of 2D, arguably Onslaught is the best, at least in difficulty. I think design-wise, personal opinion, I think Ultron Sigma is the best design villain in the series as a whole. Personal opinion only, but come on, look at that design. Tell me it's not awesome. Also the fact, as a longtime fan of Mega Man X and the fact I have X, I have Zero, and I have, of course, Sigma, all in the game, yes. And the fact Thanos is a beast in the game, the mechanics, the ability to tag in and out so fast, the different combinations with the Infinity Stone abilities and everything. And I liked the stupid over-the-top cheesy story mode. I don't care. People can keep hating on this game all they want, but I will continue defending it. And I will stay on this hill. But it's my number 5. Number 2, or number 4 next, is a tie between 2 games. And one of the 2 games tied at number 4, you're hearing the music from in the background right now. And the first of these tie games is Capcom vs. SNK 2. Yes, I actually like this more than Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I think it's a better game overall. Also, this is the game that would get me to actually really give a chance to try King of Fighters and stuff. Until I played this game, I actually had only played the Fatal Fury series. I never, outside of my KOF 9.5, I never played any of the KOF games, and only played one of the Sam Show games, so most of my knowledge only came from Fatal Fury. So with that said, coming in tied with it at number 4 for me is my favorite the Marvel vs. Capcom series. Tied for number 4 is Capcom vs. SNK 2 and Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. 2 incredible games and deserve the love they get. But now we go to the top three. Coming in third, getting the bronze medal for me. Vampire Savior comes in third place. This is the game that made me a definitive Darkstalker fan, which is another reason I love Marvel Infinite, because they brought back Lord Jeddah, which is arguably an awesome villain. I think one of the most underrated Capcom villains of all time, in my personal opinion. And the artwork, this game has aged gracefully and is still beautiful to look at to this day. It's incredible how good a Saturn game still looks this many years later. And still the cover art is great as well. But I love Jeddah. I mean, come on. But yeah, for me, number three is Vampire Savior, aka Darkstalkers 3. Coming in at number two is the game I have the most history with, as this was the very first game I ever owned on Super Nintendo, back many years ago. Coming in at number two favorite Capcom fighting game of all time, Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Yes, I know, it's not super anything, but it plays, it's way smoother, and it still, I think, actually plays surprisingly well to this day. And the fact this game is like almost 30 years old. Think about that for a second. This game is like 3 decades old, and it still plays very smooth for the most part. It blows my mind how well this game has aged for its age. It's still superb. And in general, quite a few actually Super Nintendo games have aged relatively well, which blows my mind. But my number two favorite fine game of all time from Capcom is Street Fighter 2 Turbo. My number one is a game that definitely is, like I mentioned with the first game, it's a game I have a lot of history going back to Blockbuster with. And that being Street Fighter Alpha 2. My favorite of the Alpha series by far, and my favorite Street Fighter game by far. And yes, even my favorite Capcom fighting game of all time. And I'm not sure what some people's opinions are. I'm sure there's probably people out there like myself that feel Alpha 2 is better than Alpha 3. I'm not sure how many people agree, though, that Alpha 2 is the best Street Fighter of all time, or when it comes to ranking their personal favorite overall Capcom made fighting games of all time. But for me, it is my number one. It has nostalgia in the fact this was the first game that would have as a normal playable character Akuma in that iconic cover art right there. Though, to be fair, I also played this on the very inferior Super Nintendo version of the game, which would freeze as soon as said ready fight before the match would actually begin. After I played the PS1 version of the game, I was blown away how much better the quality was, especially with, of course, obviously the sound and stuff. Though going from a 16-bit to a 32-bit, it's no surprise. But yeah, for me, favorite Capcom fighting game of all time honor goes to Street Fighter Alpha 2. So leave a comment below, let me know what is your personal favorite Capcom fighting game of all time? What's your favorite company of all time that makes fighting games? I want to see what your all's opinions are on this list. What is your stances? Like, what series do you love the most? But with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube channel. Stay safe out there, everyone.